And a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Issues and Attitudes. My name is Jeff Owens, director at WEIU Radio. My co-host is Annalicia Haynes.
Hi, everyone.
Who we'll get to in a minute. We have all kinds of guests in the studio. Dr. Ali Moshtagh. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Jeff Ashley.
Hello.
And Dr. Jim Bruehler.
Hi, everyone.
Who we found out's wife is Ann. Remember Ann from the Charleston Community Theater? So,
hey,
there you go.
get out of here.
We
That's
tie
fun.
everything back around. All from, I guess, well, you guys are from the Economics Department, right?
Two of us.
Two of us.
I'm political
And
science.
he's political science. In the middle is Mr. Dr. Ashley. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, tax and economic, and a little bit of political related. But let's talk about tax day. And really today, April 15th, is, I guess I always want to know why is it they picked April 15th. But does anybody know? And then how important it is to get your taxes in on time, and we'll just kind of see what happens after that. So,
Well, I guess they had to take a day or choose a day, so April 15th is good as any. You got plenty of time to think about doing this and get your W-2 and all these statements from banks and so on. So that's a pretty good day.
now I know that you can actually ask for an extension on the day if you need to, and I don't know how long the extension goes. But do a lot of people ask for extensions? Anybody know or on how that works?
Well, she might.
Yeah, I might have to. We'll get to me in a minute, Jeff.
We'll see if Jim knows.
I mean, I don't know all of that, but if you expect not to owe anything, you can ask for an extension. If you're going to owe, you have to pay an estimated payment when you ask
Oh, you
for an
do?
extension.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't get an extension on the payment, just on the filing.
So there you go. So let's talk a little bit. And Alicia, unfortunately, you've had some bad luck today in filing of taxes and figuring out some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe these three gentlemen can help a little bit, or at least guide you to find about maybe why this happened. So you don't have to give us numbers, but just talk a little bit about your story today.
Okay, so I guess
she's a student, keep that in mind.
my first mistake was probably filing last night. That was probably my first mistake. The second mistake was thinking that I had trust in the current tax system. No, I'm kidding. So I guess they changed how you file or how you report scholarships and grants. And of course, because I do so much around here, I don't have much of a life. I have a lot of grant money that, I guess long story short, I owe X amount of money, which is an X amount of money in my bank account.
As a student who's on scholarship and grant.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what went wrong. All I do know is that there was a new, I wish I wrote it down. The IRS changed how universities are supposed to report numbers on the 1098-T form. That's your scholarship and grant form. And it's just that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm not sure what.
So were there changes in the tax code or tax rules?
A number of changes, and non-students were getting hit this year with their returns as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just withholding amounts were different, and if people hadn't gone in and changed their W-2s, then it's not the W-2, that's what you get
The
back.
W-4s.
W-4, if they hadn't changed that to coincide with the changes to the tax law, then they were getting hit at the end of the year. So changes in deductions, changes in personal
Allowances.
exemptions and allowances, the way that they're counting scholarships now as income, all of those things added up can lead to a big surprise if people didn't know what was coming, because they changed the law but didn't tell people that they needed to go back in and change their W-4s accordingly.
And unfortunately, this real life just happened 5 minutes before the show, and so we're trying to figure out on a scramble, and unfortunately using
It's
our
okay.
student co-host
so
as our guinea
GoFundMe's
pig.
exist. So I've never. Here's the thing, in my entire college career, never asked for a handout. I mean, scholarships and grants are different, but I might actually have to.
Wow.
Well, I have no knowledge of how to do grants or scholarships, but I've talked to a lot of graduate assistants who are from other countries, and they are very confused too, because they have to file their tax returns, and then they have to take into account the treaties between the United States and their home countries. So one student gets $500 in refund, and the other one gets $100. And they ask me, how is this? I said, I don't know. This it depends on the treaty between your country and the United States. So you don't have that
Yeah.
problem.
No, and that's complicated in itself, especially for international students.
And a student would have to know that. It just seems like something that would just be another undue burden that's on a student who's trying to, better themselves. And you guys agree, disagree, or thoughts?
Well, the good thing is they don't know it, but the graduate school and the OISS, the Office of International Students and Scholars, would help them a lot. So that's the good thing about that office.
The other thing that's going on nationwide is a lot of people are reporting that they're getting lower returns than previous years under the new, taxation laws and rules. Your thoughts on that, and maybe and why and how, and just in general thoughts, I guess.
Well, that just goes along to the same thing, that they were in a hurry to get through the tax cuts, didn't really think about the ramifications, doing mid-year changes and not letting people know. So people, we were having a conversation earlier today that, it's a hassle to do a W-4, but once you do it, it's pretty much done and you don't have to worry about it anymore. And I think a lot of people that's what we do. We do it and we don't have to worry about it anymore. But this was a really big change to the tax code, and people had their same W-4s on file that they've always had because there weren't ever huge changes to the tax code, and a lot of people got blindsided.
So I'm sorry if you were going to say
Well, I
something.
was just going to point out, so they wanted a stimulus, and they therefore cut the amount of withholding out of people's paychecks, giving people a little more take-home each week
check,
or month.
Yeah.
In order to stimulate economic activity. But the flip side of that is then when you get your refund after filing, that refund's going to be smaller because you already got some of that money in the paychecks.
Okay, makes sense to me.
Yeah, I remember as soon as the new tax laws went into effect, I saw a big change in my tax withholding. So Dr. Bruehler is right.
And I think, and maybe I'm speaking out of context, and I'm certainly not speaking for everyone, but I could speak for myself. I think part of the problem is that financial illiteracy that a lot of people have, and they don't understand, what a W-4 is, or the difference between W-4, W-2, the 1040, because now you can't file a 1040 easy, I guess, that's gone with, but I think that's part of the problems, especially, I guess, speaking for a college student, is that they don't understand what that stuff means. So, like with the W-4, if you need to change the W-4, because that's something that you fill out when you first get hired, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So how do you go about changing that? Do you have to get a form from the IRS, or do you go to your employer, or does that make sense?
Yeah, you would just do it through your employer's HR, but most people wouldn't know to do it until now. I think a lot of people might be going back and either changing it if they want to get the refund that they were used to getting, or going forward, they're probably not going to be as surprised because this is
They're more prepared for
this is the
fiscal year
new
20.
reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's my understanding that that whole process is going to become more complicated. They're going to do a new W-4 system that is intended to create more accurate withholding, but the system is going to be more complex in order to do that.
It's been a complicated system anymore, and under President Trump, it's gotten more complicated. I think it's fair. Is that a fair thing to say, or or was it even does it go back a president?
Well, I think that the idea was to make it less complicated and eliminate some of the loopholes and things that people were getting. The problem is any change is going to lead to some hiccups along the way because people are used to doing it a certain way. So it in trying to simplify, it made it more complex just because it's different.
And don't you think there's always going to be people that look for those loopholes, that looks for, no matter what code or whatever rules are put in effect?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So then, as economics teachers and political science teachers, how do you inform the students of East Illinois University, as any other professor would across the country, to help them prepare so things like what happened to Annalisa don't happen?
Well, we don't know their problems. If they come to us and ask us, then we will provide them some information. About the tax form this year, I was very confused about personal exemptions. So there was no place to claim that. They ask you if you are 65, over 65, or blind, and all of that, but
The personal
Those-
exemption is gone. That's why there was no place to claim it.
Okay.
I think it's coming back in 2025.
Then why is it still there on the form?
So I think backing up a couple steps, what is a personal exemption?
You can claim exemptions for yourself, for your dependents. And if you are over 65, you get an extra exemption. If you're blind, you get another exemption. You get exemption for your spouse. And if she's over 65 or he's over 65 or blind, you get additional exemptions. But it was not there, but they took exemptions for my daughter. And I don't know how that worked.
And to clarify, there's a distinction in the law between your actual income and your taxable income. And what the exemptions do is create a bigger gap between your actual income and your taxable. So it reduces your taxable income below what your actual income is.
So as we talk about taxation today and the differences and the philosophies maybe between, economics and political science, Dr. Ashley, what kind of things do you want to talk about, and what kind of things are on your mind as you hear some of this discussion?
Well, it's always just going to be a difference of values. When we're looking at the whole taxation thing, do we cut taxes to lead to prosperity, or do we have higher taxes and more government spending to lead to greater prosperity? We look at the Nordic model. Countries tax higher, but they also have health care, education, a lot of other things provided for. So when we're looking at it here, it's just this big clash between, do we want government to take care of things, or do we hope that the individuals will step up and do it? And for a long time we've had this idea of the trickle down, that if we cut taxes enough, then the wealthy or the job creators, the money's going to start trickling down to everybody else. Started largely back with the Reagan years. We had the cuts there, and then this last one was a big cut, hoping for more trickle down. But what we've seen with most of the statistics, and we can probably get more from the economists, that we have a whole lot more billionaires than we used to have, and we also have a whole lot more poor people than we used to have. So it doesn't seem to really be trickling down that much.
Very good. Jim?
So I don't think it's accurate in a percentage terms that we have a whole lot more poor people than we used to. But the way that seems natural for me to think about this question is not whether taxes are too high or too low, or whether we can be expansionary for the economy by cutting them or so forth. For me, the natural way to think about this is what's the comparison between the taxes and what the government is doing with the money?
Yeah.
If the things that the government is doing with the money are worth more than the taxes, fine, tax and spend. If the things that the government is doing with the money are worth less than the taxes that they're collecting, then they shouldn't be doing it.
Well, I think a big part of what we have is the whole idea of transparency, that we don't know where the money is being spent, and I think people might be more willing to pony up. We're really tax averse, but I think if you could show where the taxes were going, then people might not be as tax averse. I think it's more that they're not sure how the money's being spent, so then they're a little reluctant to give more when they're not seeing returns for their money.
There you go. That's a good answer. So,
One thing I want to emphasize here is that we get most of our services from our local governments and state government. But the bulk of our taxes go to the federal government, and anytime the local government or state government wants to do something to raise taxes or something, there is a huge opposition to that. So how do we expect our city to clean up our streets, remove snow, build new roads and sidewalks and all these other things without providing them with the money? So that is a dilemma. I have an article here. The title of the article is, "For Military Contractors, Tax Day is a Payday." So, and in this article, it tells you the percentage or the amount of taxes that go to the military contractors, not the troops or not the generals, but the military contractors is staggering. So.
Good answer, too. Well, I try to talk about what's big in the news, too. The other big thing about the news lately with tax time is that President Trump refuses to release his tax returns. Your thoughts on whether he shouldn't, or does it really even matter in the scheme of things? And you all three can answer or pick and choose, but it's been in the news, and I wanted to ask you guys about it, since you know more about this than I do.
Well, it may reveal some of my bias here, but most presidential candidates have released them. This one's going to be a fight because apparently Congress wants them. The president and his attorneys have said they can't have them. They've put a deadline now on the Treasury Department to give them. The Treasury Department will probably miss the deadline, so this may end up going to the Supreme Court. And again, it may reveal my bias. But everyone else has done it, and for somebody who has claimed to be a great businessman, this would be his opportunity to show it.
Well, I don't think it matters. He's the president now, so was he crook in the past? Who cares? As long as he's the president. So I don't think that matters at this point.
Jim, do you want to chime in?
I think I already know enough to have an opinion of the man, and I don't think his tax returns are going to change it.
There you go. I just want to get your opinion mostly too, if you thought it mattered or not. Because to me, if I saw it, I probably would. It wouldn't mean anything to me. But I think the appearance of, you said, the transparency of him not wanting to scares me more than seeing him and then saying, "Oh, okay, whatever." Does that make sense?
Yes,
as a lay normal person.
Transparency hasn't been a priority though, and it's evident with this new tax system, because there weren't resources that were made available, and maybe there were, but the thing is that not enough people knew about this new change. So that has to make you wonder, okay, if not a lot of people knew about this, then what could have been done better? I know on campus there were tax workshops, and people were reaching out and trying to help students. So it's not the campus issue. This isn't a university issue. And I would argue that it has to be a sort of national issue, because a lot of individuals still did not know, or they didn't realize how big of impact this change would have. Does that am I making sense? Yeah. So I just don't think him releasing his tax returns it's not going to prove anything if people already see one thing and one thing only. The only thing it'll prove to me is that he does not make transparency a priority. So, and that's coming from a journalist.
In a possibly related point, one of the consequences of all the complexity in the tax code is it provides a lot of cover, right? Talking about transparency, is the government spending worth the taxes that are being raised? All the complexity provides a lot of cover if they're not, spending the money well, if some of it is being diverted inappropriately. Right, that's all hard to see. Same thing happens with the tax code. All the complexity there permits people to hide.
There you go. When you think about the economy right now, and we have, how do you think the economy is doing overall in America? And as you go forward in this calendar year, do you look at 2019 as being a good year, bad year? Just your thoughts on it as we sit here in Tax Day 2019.
Well, if we use the measures that we normally use, it looks like we're doing really well. But more and more I question the whole allegiance to things like the GDP as our sole measure of economic success, because things like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill are actually good for the GDP. So an environmental disaster is good because we have to spend money on the cleanup. The guy that developed the whole GDP won a Nobel Prize, but when he developed it, he said you can't look at the health of a country without looking at the income distribution. So we're using this sole number that Kuznets developed, but we're not taking him at his word and saying we need to look at income distribution too, because GDP-wise, we're number one in the world by far. But if we look at our income distribution, we're lagging behind a lot of different people. So,
other thoughts, Alan, Jim, on that? That was well said again. So
yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Well, another thing that they, especially the president, uses to speak about the health of the economy is the stock market. Not very many people benefit from that. I mean, average American does not own any stock.
Yeah, I have friends who all the time they're saying, "Well, the stock market's up," and they give direct credit to President Trump, and I'm like, "Well, I don't own stock in anything, and so it doesn't affect my day-to-day life." But I mean, I know some people do. So
I would love to be that person reading the Wall Street Journal with like a fedora or something and a cigar or a pipe. Can you imagine like leather back seats?
I'll buy you a
chairs?
cigar.
Yeah, there we go. Go pick up the Wall Street Journal at Starbucks. Anyways,
We may indirectly benefit from it because a lot of our pensions and retirement funds and all that are invested in the stocks. So that way, yeah, we will benefit from it when we retire, but
not today.
Well, that goes back to the whole trickle down. Is it good for Wall Street or is it good for Main Street? And we see a lot of things that the economy is good for Wall Street, but then the real wages for the average person are basically what they were 30 years ago. So the people up at the top are seeing income gains and the people down at the bottom are pretty stagnant.
Okay. The other thing growing up that we always heard about was the unemployment rate. If the unemployment rate's low, the economy is great. Is that true? I mean, I want to ask you guys. It seems like a simple question, but that's always the thing growing up. If unemployment's low, then the economy's doing great.
It's certainly not that simple. Because the unemployment rate is a comparison between those who are employed and those who are trying to be employed. And what we have now is a lot of people who are not even seeking employment. We've got, I think, 1 in 5 in the prime working years that aren't in the labor market. And at least some of those are just discouraged workers who aren't even trying to get a job because they don't think they can.
Yeah, I remember growing up, my mom and dad used to always tell me, well, 10% don't want to work anyway, so how do you ever say if the unemployment rate is good or bad? So, I have the brains in here. I just wanted to get all your opinions.
Well, and then employed doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to get by. We've got a number of working poor that are employed and counting towards that unemployment number, but they still qualify for public aid because they're employed, but they're not getting paid enough to live.
Ali?
And as Dr. Bruehler said, there are a lot of people who are not seeking jobs, so we don't count them. So that is one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we look at the unemployment rate. It's the lowest level ever, probably, but we don't know how many people are not looking for jobs.
Then conversely, I want to expand a little bit on that. Is the aging population of the United States worker and citizen a concern as we go forward? I mean, we're getting older as a country. People are living longer, which is good, but we also have to house them, feed them, take care of them, insurance, health care, and all that. How big a concern is that as we move forward?
Absolutely a big concern. If you think in terms of how many workers are there to fund the people who aren't working, and as we have more and more in this demographic, we now, for the first time ever, have more people above age 65 than we have below age 18. And that means that there are fewer people creating the production that has to be spread across everybody as output. And I will note that a thing that can help this situation is immigration. Right? We are not replacing our population with natives because of the low birth rate. So we really kind of need immigration in order to create the size of the workforce that's going to be big enough to have enough production to fund all those people who are on retirement.
Okay. I've heard that before, so I like hearing these new ideas. And again, we're not taking a side. We're just throwing out ideas for people to talk about today as we talk about economics and politics today. Anybody else have anything to add on that? We got about 4 minutes to go, so I didn't want to forget anything, so I'll throw it out there. Is anything you guys want to talk about when you talk about taxation, tax day, political science, economics, and how you maybe wrap Eastern Illinois University students in there? We have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to throw that out there so you get some, if you have anything that you want to speak about. Or I can continue to go.
Keep coming, it sounds like.
We can ask her student perspective on that.
On the change in the tax code, or just in general?
Taxation in general.
Yeah, taxation in general, and
I am not the student to ask. Because I probably have opinions that I shouldn't share over the
Well,
years.
here's a question then. Let me ask the guys this one. a lot of people leaving the state of Illinois, and that's been a big concern, and that it hurts us. In what ways, when there's I heard 600 people have left a certain city and are going across the river, do that. So how bad does that hurt Illinois when 600 people leave a city and work across the river?
Well, it hurts because you're losing the amount of money that you need. If you've got a city of a certain size, the infrastructure stays the same, and if you're losing people, you're having fewer people there to have to maintain it. But at the same time, I've heard that people are leaving because of taxes, and that's the inference in that question, but that's being pushed by people that don't like taxes. If you've ever been to a beach in California, there's a certain appeal to being on the beach in California as opposed to 40 below in a cornfield in the winter. So there are other things that are pulling people out other than just taxes, because if we look at our taxes compared to other states, we're right in the mix. So there's something other than just the taxes that are having people go out of Illinois. And one thing I think that has been killing us is the lack of the state putting money towards higher ed. Because if it's a better deal for students to go out of state, once they go out of state, they're going to stay out of state. So I think that the lack of investment in the state has been probably more problematic than any tax rate.
I agree with Dr. Ashley. I don't think taxes will cause people to move. I have been on many hiring committees on campus here, and we always get tons of people applying for a job at the Eastern Illinois University from Indiana, Michigan, other places, all the places that people say Illinoisans go to. So taxes are not the reason.
Well, there might be a small sample problem there, but Dr. Moshtagh was talking earlier about funding state and local governments, and that's where most of your services come from. This problem of flight out of Illinois is really going to hit Charleston hard, I think, when we get the results of the next census, because the federal dollars that come back to the local governments are based on those census numbers, and when our lower population hits, it's really going to be hard on our
And that's a
local
whole
governments.
nother can of worms, and a whole issue that I know newspapers in Illinois have been covering, like the Herald Indicator Review. So we just read something in the Associated Press last week about that. So it's a shame.
There you go. And we're almost out of time, so we have about 30 seconds left. Any last thoughts for any of our guests
I
today?
have one to students.
Right, yeah.
You have to read. You got to look into this stuff, So I'm embarrassed because I should know this stuff, and I have sources to to talk to and to ask questions and to write the stories about it. But that's important. So this could have been avoided. I feel like, at least in my humble opinion, not that matters.
No, it matters. Ollie, Jim, or Jeff, any final thoughts? Well, I know you want to thank these two for coming, Ollie, so I'll do that for you. So we appreciate all of our guests coming today here on WEIU. Interesting. We got to have you guys back, because I think we can continue talking about taxes and political science.
This was my
and all
favorite
that.
show.
It was kind of good.
Yeah.
So,
It was fun.
And Ollie had a request, so this is Hitmix 88.9 WEIU, and you're 13.